Cheep, cheep, cheep. Cheep, cheep, cheep.
Well, this is the Depressing Tavern. What's the middle used for? Dancing? Welcome to a world that barely survived Cataclysm. An empire comprising 40 towns now essentially have only 3 left. Around them is mostly wasteland. Plus there are raiders. Plus growing crops has become quite difficult as well. In the towns, noble houses and factions vie for control, using subterfuge, money, armies, and lost arcane knowledge, left over from the old empire, all in the hope that unified leadership will halt the crumbling of society and civilization. And in all fairness, greed and self-interest are motivations as well. The tavern looks absolutely delightful now, doesn't it? The visuals back up the grim scenario. The pale, dark, drained color palette helps sell the whole caustic, hopeless world idea. Buildings are broken and grimy too. Just look at this arena, a focal point of the largest city left. Yet some very blocky spectators still use it though. So I would say that the styling itself is quite good, but the graphics not so much. It uses 3D graphics but not the best. Natural terrain especially looks jagged with repeating textures. Not great. The cities are well designed, and technically I suppose the humans look alright, at least when they're not taking in an arena fight, at least for an isometric game, where you usually view them from far away. But there are plenty of areas that feel lifeless. And the areas that are populated have humans who aren't really fans of the whole moving around thing. But arguably that works in the game's favor. It's another bullet point to mark the grim world. They've got nothing to do and very little reason to hope. We'll just stand around while the protagonist runs about. I like it, but it's definitely not for everyone. Depression is not a feeling that RPGs generally aim for. It's got some nice Roman styling though. Centurions, combined with techno fantasy. The atmosphere is great too, but once again depressed. Ominous music injects morose. I don't think there's one upbeat track in the bunch. There's no mystical epic that scores your adventure. This isn't an adventure. You've got a job to do in a cutthroat world. Story-wise, the game is okay. The dialogue and descriptions are good. But the overall plot, though, not necessarily groundbreaking. But there are plenty of choices to make. And there are different classes that give your character different histories and dialogue options. And I feel like this game is quite special. A lot of games claim that if you replay them, new stories will unfold. That different choices ensure replay value. But I truly believe that the average game that claims that cannot compare to this game. So, if the overall story isn't that good, perhaps it's understandable, as all the branching narratives dilute the focus. If you start the game as a merchant, you will probably play the rest of the game as a merchant, and maybe not even glance at some other plot points. Your starting conditions and decisions fairly consistently affect your ending, or at the very least what happens in Chapter 1 and 2. There are many factions with their own stories, and quite often there's an opportunity to betray someone. I personally wouldn't blame you if you consider this game more of a visual novel than anything else. But the branching does dilute towards the end, because at that point your character can branch out a bit more in terms of skills, and some of the third chapter missions are seemingly available to more than one class. So I'd wager that most of the ending options will be available to you, regardless of your decisions. I mean, you probably won't succeed or get very far in those paths, because jack of all trades, which takes away a bit of the freshness. Because if you progress that far through the scenario, and can succeed in the skill check, there's less mystery to uncover on your next playthrough with a different class and skills. So essentially in the end, things become a bit more general and less class specific. But when you stick to your faction and class-specific missions, it is quite impressive. So arguably it doesn't matter if the plot dilutes a bit. Plenty of paths and intrigues get chucked at you, for your role-playing pleasure. And as I said, the dialogue is good, if strangely crass. And the gameplay's good, or at the very least admirable. You can actually play as a thief, or assassin, or negotiator. Instead of just being a warrior that can sidestep 1 or 2 confrontations because they got a couple of points in persuasion. Or a rogue who can between fights steal a few things because they know how to pick locks. You can have a combat-focused character, but I did not opt for that. At the start, the developer states that combat is difficult in this game and should be avoided at all costs. Originally, that sounded a bit pretentious, but it checks out. And the combat is turn-based, so it really extends to the feelings of dread you feel, knowing you're probably not gonna win this fight. Stab, shoot, throw, desperately avoid going up against multiple enemies at once. As for the stealth gameplay, usually that's represented as a dialogue option, and you need to succeed in the appropriate skill check to remain undetected. The speech and crafting elements work that way as well, but with stealth there are transitions between screens, for different areas, multiple sections of infiltration, kind of like text-based adventures, except with pictures. It makes use of some of your imagination and is quite pleasing, and is surprisingly action-packed. In my opinion, this game is one of the best examples of you being able to embody a non-combat class in an RPG. And not just as a support unit, you can actually be the protagonist with those classes. On my first playthrough, I played as a merchant and talked my way through every obstacle. I did not fight once. Sure, now and then I would save and take on an optional fight, lose, load, and then go on with the game. Other than that, I was a wordsmith that dabbled in some crafting and lore. And after some trial and error, I managed to get the Chosen One ending. And on my second playthrough, I played as a thief and pretty much tried to rob everyone. Once again, I did not focus on combat, but because my speech skills were lower, I had to kill a few people, and with some difficulty. This time I tried to bump up some of the skills I was lacking in last time, and I feel like I succeeded more in some areas, but some avenues were still denied to me. Because being a master thief leaves very little room to learn lore, let alone crafting. And when it came time for me to move towards an ending, I found that I was really rather limited in what I could actually achieve. I finally settled on one that seemed like it could be a good ending, but discovered it required some fighting. A pretty difficult fight. And after a few attempts I decided to give up and go after an easier ending. One I already tested on the previous playthrough. One of those nothing endings. You know, do you go and finish the quest? Or quit and wander the earth, that kind of thing. I suppose it was a bit unrealistic to expect a thief to be able to repair and operate an airship. Finally, I attempted a lore master character. But crafters and lore masters don't really have their own guild. So I was kind of alone and had very few resources, and felt it very difficult to actually reach the places where my skills would be effective. Like Indiana Jones without martial prowess. I tried to compensate by spreading my skills out a bit more, but that did not go well. You guessed it, I was still bad at fighting, better than on previous playthroughs, but still quite bad. Through trial and error, I found some avenues through which I could advance, but ultimately it felt as though most things were inaccessible to me. So, if you want to go fancy, it requires a lot of careful thought. Specialization is key, and picking up extra skill sets requires a keen mind. I mean, playing as a lore master, with fairly high crafting and lore skills, with a slight knack for alchemy, and a grasp over most of the speech skills, but not enough to actually be helpful, was quite a frustrating way to play. Just trying to find a crack you can squeeze through to progress. I gave up before I completed that run. But hey, 2.5 playthroughs in a row, I usually don't replay games concurrently. So when I wasn't flying too close to the sun, I enjoyed myself quite thoroughly. But I must emphasize, this game really is not for everybody, there's so much reading. And a great deal of the action takes place as dialogue options. So effectively, all the different class actions are split into 2 realms of gameplay. Skill checks and combat. And the combat is actively discouraged. Which is quite strange when you consider just how much effort they went to in creating all of this equipment. Plus, most of the character animations are attached to fighting. So are half of the skills. But I must say, the small amount of combat I engaged in was fun when there was a chance of me actually winning. It's rather pleasant to hear Roman armor clink. Let's be conservative here and base my playtime off of my first playthrough. The assumption being you will only play 1 playthrough, leaving you room to be surprised if you play more. That took me 18 hours, which is short by CRPG standards, and I suppose a bit middle of the road for visual novels. And it is cheap on Steam. 95 Rand full price, 23 Rand 75 on sale. That's 1 Rand 32 per hour of gameplay. If we assume one playthrough. Quite splendid. And if you replay it, and if you get into it, I have no problem believing that you will, the deal gets even better. For me, 2 playthroughs and a bit of lore master, that took me 33 hours to do. And upgraded things to 72 cents per hour of gameplay, which is excellent. Size-wise, the game takes up 1949 megabytes on the hard drive. So it's not an easy download, but it's not bad. And it does work on the Warhorse, but it does lag quite noticeably there. But when you consider the gameplay and the turn-based combat, the fact that most of the movement is just you running through streets with very few moving parts, and the fact that most of the action is dialogue-based, it may be worth risking. And hopefully you don't need that much of a step up from the Warhorse to play it properly. Since it works on the Warhorse in the first place, stereotypically it isn't kid-friendly. It's quite sweary, grim, it has violence, it's depressing, and a lot of characters engage in sexism, even directed at you if you play as a female character. A world full of caustic characters trying to get ahead. Slave trading raiders, religious fanaticism, but at the very least it doesn't mention Roman orgies. The game is a great depressing feudalistic world, with the atmosphere to accompany it, which is good if you're into that sort of thing. But some of you may think that the depressing atmosphere is just awful. I'm not kidding, it's grim. So remember to add that as a con if it's gonna be a problem for you. It has good visual design that backs it up, pale color palette and crumbling buildings. The music backs it up even further, ominous, hostile, joyless music. The game has a wide variety of choices, storylines and endings, both general and class specific. As long as you actually have the skills to access those storylines, it has good, unique gameplay. You actually embody your class. To me, one of the best examples of that being done in a video game. Thief, soldier, merchant, etc. On the maybe side, combat is difficult and is actively discouraged. But when you're succeeding, it's fun. Although I wager success is rare. Also, all the branching narratives do dilute the story a bit. Arguably, the plot is a bit functional, but the dialogue and world building are quite good. And while the game does give you a lot of different ways of playing, embodying different classes, unique mechanics for them weren't designed. Not really. So the gameplay is split into turn-based combat or dialogue skill checks. And since the combat is discouraged, the argument can be made that this is more of a visual novel. So just make sure that's what you want, or that you're up for trying it, lest you be surprised by the odd nature of the CRPG. There are a few deviations, such as the multiple screen approach of stealth, but it's not that different from your basic skill checks. On the con side, the only true con here is the graphics. Sure, the design is good, but the graphics are bad. Some areas are lifeless, and some are downright ugly. And you can't even say that the visuals have aged a bit, because the game isn't that old. Come on, play it. It's a unique, worthwhile beast, much like this gorgeous whale with the piercing blue eyes. Don't listen to them, the grey background isn't dirt, that's just whale skin.
Choip, choip, choip. Choip, choip, choip.